Hey everybody, welcome back to Fighting Matters. I'm Steve Kwan from BJJ Mental Models. I have Jesse Walker from Hands BJJ. Jesse, sir, good to see you.
What's up, everybody? Good to be here. I'm excited about this one.
Me too. Now, first, before we introduce the topic, got to introduce the guest. He's a friend of yours, Jesse, so do you want to go ahead and intro him and do the honors here?
Sure. So I brought one of my very good friends and fellow BJJ black belt, Derek Jones. Derek, why don't you introduce yourself? Tell us about yourself.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. I'm Derek. I am a black belt. I started training with Jesse about 2 months ago, actually. I think it may have come up on the podcast earlier, actually. I was the black belt that came to his gym specifically because of the culture.
You're the adopted black belt. I know. I've heard all about you.
I'm that guy. Yeah. So, so I trained at a few other places, and just because of, sort of distance things and my kids getting older and stuff like that, I had to sort of rehome and did a look around who was really doing good in the jiu-jitsu community, since I had that luxury of, looking around, and found Rough Hands, and I've been there for about 2 months and I've been very happy. When I'm not doing jiu-jitsu, I work in social innovation. So I work with young people to help them build businesses, products, ideas, things like that improve their communities rather than just make a profit. And before that, I was a philosophy professor. And so it's one after another job that I have a very hard time describing to strangers. But yeah.
Well, that's perfect, because this very weird intersection of responsibilities is what makes you the perfect guest for this conversation. So Jesse and I were shopping this idea around, and man, this is actually a difficult topic to find the right expertise on. But we want to talk about memes, right? I mean, they're cute, they're adorable, they stick in your head, they're funny, but somehow in the year 2025, they have become a political powerhouse tool of propaganda and of messaging and PR, things I never would have expected. I mean, God, I am old enough that I remember, when you talked about memes, to me, that was like the dancing baby and all your base are belong to us. And then you got troll face and that stuff. But now we're seeing increasingly sophisticated use of what was really just this kind of grassroots thing that people on the internet did for fun. But we're in a world now where you've got the White House and opponents of the White House shooting pretty sophisticated memes back and forth at each other over political channels. This is completely at odds with the politics that I grew up with. When I was a kid, politics was like two stuffy guys in a suit basically lecturing back and forth at each other. And now they're all just shit posting. It's bizarre, but there's a reason they do it, right? Because it works. Of course, the word meme itself is a scientific term, and I'm sure that's probably part of what you're going to get to. But maybe first, I'd like to get you to explain for everyone, because this is one of the words that we use a lot, but we don't think a lot about. What is a meme? Like both from a scientific perspective and also from a modern perspective, like a computer culture perspective. What does this word mean?
Yeah. So the original, as far as I'm aware anyway, the original use of meme came from Richard Dawkins. So evolutionary biologist. For a while, he was kind of dabbling in professional atheism and stuff like that. But he wrote a paper called The Selfish Gene that started out sort of looking at evolutionary biology from a gene's eye perspective, right? So the idea that the gene is really the core of everything, and subject to these various evolutionary pressures, what happens? It starts, sort of building more and more elaborate meat machines to carry itself around so that it can propagate, right? And ultimately, it's all about the gene getting itself out there. And that's biologically, come under a lot of fire. It's a big issue. What's the proper unit of selection and stuff like that, whatever. But at the very end of that paper, he talks about cultural replication and the idea that just like genes are in the business of self-replicating, we can also talk about cultural artifacts. So that could be, right, nowadays we think about, like you said, I think I'm in the same generation you are, right, where we're talking about all your base are, belong to us, or boy, that cat really wants that cheeseburger, all that kind of stuff. But initially memes are just just cultural artifacts, right? So that could be pictures, but it could also be songs, it could be fads, it could be, earworms, commercial jingles, slang, phrases, right? Before the internet, right? If you got again, like in college, you got a bunch of guys together, what'd they do? They all quoted Will Ferrell and Adam Sandler movies at each other. That's meme transmission, right? And it's, sort of showing, hey, I'm part of the in-group because I've, I've got the same cultural diet that you do. I find the same things funny that you do, right? And we've sort of, transmitted that stuff around. And the meme, as Dawkins talked about it, was the idea that, well, let's look at this thing itself, this cultural artifact, and how it is transmitted, how it affects the transmitters. So, he gives the example of, religions as memes that sometimes, for example, contain the instructions for their own replication, right? So if you join a religion that has like a heavy evangelism requirement, for example, right? Part of absorbing that meme is also getting the instructions to share that meme widely with others, right? The alternative would be like a death cult. That's a meme that sort of has the recipe for its own, sort of programmed cell death built into it. Because, when you're dead, you're not as good at spreading it. And so what I find really interesting about memes is both what are the conditions for good meme transmission, but also what it is to be sort of parasitized by a meme. And now we use the term viral like it's no big deal, right? But originally, right, the idea is, well, once you have the meme, it's in you. It's part of who you are. And it's not a crazy idea to think of us as being our personalities as being partially composed by the memes that we've absorbed and how those memes have interacted with one another. If you think about all of your beliefs and tendencies and habits and stuff like that as sort of composing a big network, and each new addition to that network affects all the surrounding things around it. It's not crazy to think of us as sort of one philosopher in particular. I'm thinking of Sue Blackmore. Whether she holds this position or not, I don't know anymore, but she used the term that I'm so fond of using. The self is a massively co-adapted memeplex, right? And it's who you are is composed, at least in part, of all of these interconnected bits of information that you have accumulated over the years, some of which you share, some of which affect the other bits of information, and all of that together sort of makes up a big chunk of what it is to be you. And so, yeah, so I to this day still think of kind of personality, at least partially in terms of what memes have taken root in our mind and so on. And now, of course, what's really exciting is that as our sort of environment or our informational environment has changed and become more complex through social media and the internet, now we can spread these things way more quickly than we ever could before. And the modern version of this is, right, it's pictures or pictures with sound clips or whatever like that. And now transmission is, I don't even have to take the time to share them with someone like verbally or something like that. I can click and send. And I think a lot of us do that, right? I connect with friends from out of state that I don't get a chance to talk to very often. But sure enough, we've sent, 15 memes back and forth over the course of a day. And I think that's in some ways a really good thing. It's a good thing until it's not, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because the language you use here, you're talking about memes as having genetics as the base for the concept and how they go viral and how they, to some extent, are intending to reproduce and to spread. And man, you talk about it like that and these things sound like they're alive. And maybe at a philosophical level, maybe they kind of are, which is sort of scary when you think about it.
They can certainly take on a life of their own, right? Like metaphorically speaking. I mean, any more than like we don't want to think of genes as sentient or anything like that either, right? But yeah, I mean, certainly if an idea takes hold, I mean, you can think of people that, have gotten swept up in a cultural movement, right? That's what happened. I put some ideas in my head that changed a whole bunch of the other ideas in my head, and those ideas led to behavior, and now we're off to the races, right? And now we're doing whatever it is we're doing, right? We're storming the Capitol or whatever that is. That is a behavioral output of meme transmission for sure.
It's fascinating when you think about it, because going back in time just a few years or a few decades, I guess, if you wanted to put an idea out into the world, there were a lot of obstacles to doing that. I mean, first of all, you had to have some degree of creative capability to be able to make something, right? There was at least an expectation that you had an artistic bone in your body. And then after that, you had to achieve access to a platform, which is its own difficult thing. If you want to write a book, you've got to get in contact with a publisher or someone who can promote it for you. If you want to make a video game, you've got to have someone publish it. You probably have to partner with a platform to get that out there. You really don't have the ability to just make something on your own. Whereas so much has changed in the past few decades. First being that pretty much anyone can create something now. The barrier to entry for creation and the expectations as to what that entails are far lower than they've ever been. I mean, a few decades ago, someone with a slight knowledge of Microsoft Paint could make a perfectly acceptable meme, which, if it's funny enough, would circulate around the world. And of course, the really cool but also dangerous thing about digital tech is it eliminates all of the middlemen and the gatekeepers, right? I mean, we are publishing this podcast because we have access to platforms where we can do that directly. If we were doing this 30 or 40 years ago, we would have to convince some television or radio network to carry us, right? And they would probably say, why on earth would anyone carry a show about Brazilian jiu-jitsu activist culture? It doesn't make any sense, right? The number of people who care about this is very small. But the proliferation of all of this technology means that anyone has the capability of getting a message out there and having it go viral, again, using very real biological words in the context of meme culture. One random person in their living room with a phone can create a message that within 24 hours will be all around the world. I mean, I think of these ridiculous, weird, like JD Vance fat baby memes. I don't even know what he's supposed to be, but I mean, some presumably person just made one of those and shared it with a friend. And over a period of weeks, everyone in the world now knows what I'm talking about. If I were to share that picture of that JD Vance meme, even though it really doesn't look anything like him anymore, everyone in the world would know exactly what it is and what the context is of it without a word being spoken. Across languages, it's completely clear what it means. And that kind of connectivity and ability for any one person to reach the whole world is both cool and terrifying at the same time when you really think about the implications of what it means.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and also if you share that particular meme, I can kind of guess what community you're a part of. Right. Well, not always. I guess that JD Vance meme was actually shared on.
That one may have escaped containment. That one might even be circulating amongst MAGA at this point, for all I know.
That one, no. Maybe it's just lean into it, right? We'll co-opt it, and then it'll be okay. But yeah, like for a lot of that stuff, I mean, I often think about, and actually, this podcast is a really good example of something where you've got a group of people that have a really, I think, important message for a lot of people that may feel isolated in their gyms, and this is a chance to create that virtual community, right, through sharing this stuff. And same thing with the memes, right? I mean, I know in my own experience, right, I have different groups on Instagram where I will send something to one group because I know they'll find that funny. And I will send something to another group because I think they'll find that funny, right? And not because any of them would be offensive or something like that, but just because of particular tastes. And I do think that now memes are increasingly becoming sort of social glue, where it is continually reaffirming membership in a community. And also, right, I mean, again, right, this is like not fancy stuff. This is, I have 2 teenage boys. Teenage boy law is make your friends laugh at all costs, right? And sometimes that can be a real problem, but, by and large, it's, we're bonding, we're creating these networks. And I think memes can be really powerful for doing that kind of stuff. The downside, of course, is, right, it can also be used to create really toxic cultures and sometimes help people justify things that they ordinarily wouldn't have without that additional, information stuff. But yeah, anybody can do it now. And yeah, marketers right now are all, you can Google it, right? What makes a meme go viral? And you will find, think piece after think piece trying to figure out how do we create the thing that everybody shares for us. And there seem to be some some basic rules for it, but I think the art to it is still very hard to pin down, right? There's no one algorithm for it, although AI may have figured it out or is maybe about to, which is a whole separate thing.
God. Yeah, that's a whole other topic, right? I mean, AI plus meme generation is a potentially very dangerous concept because, I mean, even just in the past few months, right? If you were to ask me, like, what's the harm going to be of AI in the political space? I would have thought, well, the biggest harm is people will no longer be able to tell what's true and what's not. And I really worried that we would live in some dystopian hellscape where nothing in the news can be trusted. And maybe that will still happen, but that's not what I'm seeing right now, right? What I see right now is AI is being used for things that are very clearly fake and not even really intended to be real, but they're intended to ridicule and mock or to send a message. And it's so much easier to make stuff with AI than it ever has been before. I mean, like I said, a few decades ago, if you wanted to make a meme, it wasn't a high barrier to entry. You had to know how to use Microsoft Paint. You don't even have to worry about that now. You can just go and talk to a generator and just say, like, I want Donald Trump in a diaper crying. And boom, you've got a photorealistic video that you can share around the world. And maybe as a one-off, those aren't that compelling. But the one thing that's really surprising me is when the internet is just flooded with this proliferation of like AI slop memes. There's something very sticky about like a photorealistic video meme, even if you know it's not real, right? Like even if that, there was that one a while ago of what was it? It was JD Vance using Cheetos to paint orange on Donald Trump's face, and it's photorealistic. I mean, obviously, anyone who knows that AI exists knows it's not real, but God, it resonates hard because it looks so real, and it probably only took someone a few seconds to minutes to make such a thing. So what kind of world are we heading into where this is going to become the basis of communication? I mean, it could be a bad thing. It could also be a really good thing, because if it's, well, the one thing about this method of communication is it gets right into people's brains real quick and it spreads real quick. And there's no rule saying that we have to use this for shitty, awful purposes. I mean, you could use this for charity fundraisers. You could use this for promoting local activist and support groups. You don't have to use this for bad stuff. But often the kind of people who would use this for good are usually, I think, a little bit behind the curve on this stuff. So it might take them a while to catch up.
Fully agree. I still share the concern about us not being able to tell about what's true and what's false, right? I mean, once the technology's there, that's a whole separate issue, and I'm concerned about it. As far as like AI generated memes, I'm a little concerned about anybody can use AI to create a thing. You use the term flood. That's what scares me more than anything else. If this is, I have two academic rants, and this is all you'll get out of me. But so people are really concerned with trying to achieve good fit with their environments, right? Like again, like at the biological level, we're interested in this with organisms adjusting metabolic rates and in response to presence or absence of energy sources, or finding camouflage to fit into your environment, whatever, right? And the cool thing about human beings is we are able to do so much more, and we have so many different needs than that. And one thing we're really good at is modifying our environments to achieve that good fit. All right, so the dumb example of this is if you walked up to a messy desk and you had to work there, you would immediately start organizing things, putting piles of paper in places where you could find them, right? Where you expect to find them. And you and I might organize our desks very differently. But you would show up and you'd kind of move things around in a way to where it's adaptive for you. It fits the way you think. When we think about like social emotional needs, nobody likes, regardless of what an iconoclast you are, nobody likes the feeling of being the odd man out, right? Having the person with the wildly unpopular opinion. Even if you know you're right, there's still a little bit of work to get through. If I have a really, really crappy opinion about a group of people or something like that, and nobody in the locker room shares it, I am most likely not going to voice it. But if you change my informational environment around a little bit, right? So now I'm getting memes that have these kinds of messages attached to them, right? Or they connote certain things, or they make fun of certain things, or, sort of pervert and trivialize certain things that we might really hold important, right? As people that are trying to, look out for the little guy and so on. Any one of those memes may not do anything. The flood of, filling someone's environment with tons and tons of these things is going to make them feel a little more comfortable, right? It's changing the environment to where that sort of an attitude fits a little bit better. And so what worries me a lot is not any one particular meme, but it's the volume of them. And the thing about going back to AI is they're not just doing one-offs, right? It can be create 500 related memes and let's put them all out there through different channels. Or let's take this really popular meme. Hey, AI, let's tweak it to make it a little more in line with my beliefs, and let's send it back out there and see how it plays. And that kind of stuff really worries me for things like jujitsu gym culture, for sure, right? Where guys are sending this stuff back and forth to each other as part of a community. But well outside of jujitsu, right? If we get to the point where people are laughing a lot at really insensitive stuff, and it doesn't happen all at once, it's just through that gradual nudging, right? As everyone's Overton window gets moved over a little bit more and a little bit more, that really concerns me. It concerns me for young people. It concerns me for people at the gym. Like it's a bad deal.
You make me think now that maybe one of the reasons why memes are so harmful is they kind of give you the ability to sort of brute force that Overton window. You just flood the whole market, the whole mind space with all of these memes, and eventually just the sheer momentum of it pushes everything to a direction that we might not want it to go in. I'm not sure if we've explained this before, but could you explain briefly the concept of the Overton window? What is that exactly?
Yeah, so the idea of sort of what we are willing to. Oh, and I'm probably people with backgrounds in political science are going to be like, but right, but I think I'm thinking of it in terms of the window of what's appropriate and what's normal. If we want to think of it as left wing, right wing, and centrist or whatever like that, right? It's as our tolerance gets nudged one way or another, as we get more information, we gradually calibrate our beliefs to the available evidence, right? We do that with everything. And so if everyone around me is, super, super crunchy liberal, most likely my concept or my sort of my mental image of what a centrist would look like is going to be a little more lefty. On the contrary, if I'm in an area where everybody is super conservative and I am just inundated with that sort of stuff all the time, my concept of a centrist is going to move a little bit to the right. And frequently, right, the number of people that say, oh, I'm a centrist, right, which is just like a way of saying I'm not a radical extremist, whatever that is. But two people can say they're a centrist and mean radically different things depending on their concept of what a centrist is. What I worry about is, this is happening, right? There are meme farms that are explicitly designed to nudge public opinion in one direction or the other. And it's right now, I think, right-wing movement is having its day. I don't know that I don't know that the solution to that is left-wing manipulation either. But I think that's it though, right? If I'm just thinking about sort of the window of what's, sort of reasonable, decent, middle of the road, all opinions considered, that window is not a fixed target. It's a thing that can absolutely be manipulated by what you come into contact with. And there are people who want very badly for us to come into contact with all sorts of stuff that's going to push it in one way or the other.
The way that I had it explained to me is that the Overton window is basically, what do we consider culturally acceptable to talk about? Like, you don't have to necessarily agree with it, but you're not going to freak out if someone brings up this idea. And this changes over time based on what society considers okay. I mean, if you were to go back in time 100 years, there would be people who discuss things that at the time would be considered within that Overton window, which today we would say it is completely unacceptable to say that because society has progressed. And the scary thing is, in many ways, it feels like all of these memes and the things around them are pushing the Overton window back in the other direction. And you are seeing things like just straight up neo-Nazis trying to become acceptable again. And there's people now who are arguing that, oh, well, we need to actually listen to these people and give them a spot at the table and invite them to debates because don't we want their opinion? And my answer is no, we absolutely do not, right? There's a reason why they were pushed out of the Overton window. It was called World War II. We don't want them back. But because of just the sheer persistence of that propaganda, which includes memes, unfortunately, it's getting harder and harder to push back against these people. And so folks like us have to push back even harder to reinforce that mindset is not welcome. It's not part of the Overton window. And you brought up that one of the things about memes is that sometimes they can be used to share really gross stuff, right? Sometimes it's just good faith, funny stuff. Sometimes there's really awful stuff in memes. And if you take a look at a lot of the far-right meme farms, there is some really gross stuff happening in there. And the thing about memes that is interesting is they give the sender or the sharer a little bit of plausible deniability, which I think is dangerous, right? If I just go to you and I say something horrific and highly racist, right? you can pin that right on me. You can say, Steve, that is completely unacceptable. You should not have said this. I have no defense, right? Because I said it. But if I share a meme with you, I can always say, oh no, I didn't make it. I just hit the like button, or I just hit the reshare button, or I just sent it to you because I thought I'm just the vessel that passed this along. Don't pin that on me. And I think that can make meme culture a little bit dangerous because people feel a little bit more okay with sharing really awful stuff on the grounds of, well, I didn't make it. I just hit the retweet button, right? And that kind of plausible deniability, I think, makes it harder for people to really be held accountable for sharing this stuff. I mean, one of the first big proponents of this that I can think of was Trump, who, a lot of the stuff, he just reshares it, right? And that could be his excuse. Don't you think it's funny? I just reshared it. Well, I don't think it's funny, right? I don't think someone in that situation should be posting that kind of stuff, regardless of whether it was their original content or not. But their counter argument could be, well, I didn't make it. I just hit the share button. What does this have to do with me? What are your thoughts on that? On people kind of hiding behind memes to use them as a vehicle for stuff they wouldn't feel comfortable saying themselves, but they can communicate that message kind of indirectly through the transition of memes.
Yeah, no, I think that's really interesting because it opens the question of whether sharing a meme constitutes a speech act, right? I'm transmitting information to you, but I'm transmitting somebody else's information. Yeah, so like if it's not speech, what is it, right? Is it performance art? Is it, I mean, I think about staying outside of memes, right? If I tell somebody I want them to watch a TV show that I really like. And then they watch it and it's just horrific and just racist and terrible in all these sorts of ways, right? I think they'd be reasonably justified in saying, what the hell, man? Like, that was a terrible thing you sent me, and I think less of you for sending it, right? And maybe I can hide behind, well, I didn't create it, but at the end of the day, I was the transmitter. I mean, I do think that and none of that's to deny what you're saying, which is that people are using that excuse, right? It's, well, hey, man, I'm just being edgy. I'm just having fun. We're breaking social norms, haha, we're whatever. We're South Park, right? Or whatever it is. But at the end I think there's a really important argument to be made that any sort of communication carries with it a little bit of responsibility. And actually, one entry point into this, I think, which maybe in the history of memeing this wound up, is the idea that, well, I'm transmitting absurd memes. So this is just the weirdest friggin' thing. It's a frog on a unicycle, right? That kind of stuff, which expresses nothing, right? It's just a weird thing, and we're both going to laugh at how weird it is, but there's nothing really being communicated. And I have actually, previously when I was teaching, I did this. I had a day of memes, and I told students, send me all of your stuff. Send me funny stuff, send me weird stuff, send me unsettling stuff. And we laid it out, and we figured out basically in a continuum, starting with like the radically absurd to the funny, to the problematic, to the like just everybody in the room is kind of shocked that anyone is putting that stuff out. And it's a really, it's easy to start with, hey, I'm just making you laugh with this weird thing, to, well, I mean, we're staying equally unserious, but now this does seem to carry a little bit of a message about brown people. And I think people are able to hide behind that continuity more than they should. And unfortunately, the problem with responsibility is responsibility only matters if people are held responsible, right? And yeah, that's...
Well, and I think, not to blame all of society's ills on Joe Rogan, but let's get into it, right? So I feel like a lot of this stuff is, they are hiding behind the shield that we have provided comedy for forever, right? Comedians, professional comedians, have been able to say absurd things, offensive things. But I mean, for the vast majority of them, in a kind of artful way, and it's been to provoke and to show a mirror to society about what's going on in the society in that moment. And now we've got this huge movement where you're sending these memes back and forth, and as soon as somebody gets upset, it's like, hey, we're just telling jokes here. This is supposed to be funny. This isn't serious. This is Pepe the fucking frog and everything else, right? He's got a big stupid grin on his face. And that seems to be the big defense mechanism that they're all kind of hiding behind. That they can always just fall back to, like, hey, we're just telling jokes. Like, we don't really mean any of this stuff. And then come to find out as the years progress, like, they completely meant all of this shit.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, because it's different kinds of joke. Because there are people that do really offensive comedy, but the joke is what they are saying is awful. And
Right.
then, right. And then, so I think about, like Anthony Jeselnik, someone I think of as an example of this, who just says across the board, just horrible stuff, right? But that's the joke, is
That's
like,
the
at
joke.
no point is he holding himself up as a truth teller or something like that. Like, his persona is, I'm the worst person in the world, and we're all in on it. As opposed to, right, with that other kind of stuff that has come up where they're like, hey, we're just joking. Like, the sense I always get is it's the same kind of vibe of like kids passing notes in class and they got found out. And, then they're like, oh, well, hey, teacher, hey, we were just telling jokes. We don't mean anything by it. But then when the teacher turns back around, they're kind of back to, kind of giggling about how they were able to put one over on them, right? Because, it's not the joke is not the transgression. The transgression is the delivery mechanism. And yeah, that's a tough point to drive home for folks when, yeah, and I think there are some folks that are probably just very nihilistic about it and don't especially care as long as you get a laugh out of it. But that raises that question of whether it's okay to be nihilistic like that. And there might be a lot of, it's hard to do, but I think there's probably a lot of good moral reason to sometimes be the joy kill in the room and say, why is that funny? Which is the easiest way to ruin any joke, but especially a really shitty one.
Yeah. But sometimes you have to. And when that line is actually really hard to pin down on, right? Because I mean, we can talk about some of the just unbelievably offensive right-wing humor that we've seen that's, racist or completely inappropriate. Yeah, there's a problem with that. But their counter would be, well, we have to protect freedom of speech. We have to protect comedy. And I think probably the strongest argument they could make is, what about South Park? Don't all you libs love South Park and what they're doing? And it's like, God damn, that's actually a really good defense, right? I mean, I can't even describe what South Park is doing right now because YouTube will probably take this video down if I put it into words, right? It's wildly inappropriate what they're doing. But they're doing it. And I do agree, I'd actually love to do an episode on comedy and its role in politics and what's appropriate and what's not. I just don't know who the right guest would be to talk to about that. But it does feel like we should allow a degree of pushing the envelope, but there's also a point where it's too much. There's a very, very delicate line of where, like, you've crossed over from being edgy into, like, this is just completely in the wrong direction. I mean, I think very much of the Michael Richards bit, right, that completely tanked his career. You've crossed completely into the line of this should be well beyond, and even he admits is well beyond the realm of good taste and what should be said in an environment like that. But it's really hard to actually explain where that line is. I mean, I know George Carlin had previously said, it's about your target. It's about, you should be using comedy to punch up and not punch down. And that sounds good, but it's actually sometimes really hard to know what that even means, like who's punching up and who's punching down and what qualifies as one versus the other. So I'm very conflicted on this because I agree that comedians should be given freedom to do their work. I think there's value in pointing out the absurdity of the world that we live in. And I don't think we should be rushing to punish them for every little thing they say. But I also do think that the rise of a lot of these far-right hate movements is masked in this absurdist humor. It's very nihilistic. I think of the trope of the Joker, right? When I was growing up, there were a lot of these characters like the Joker, or if you're into video games, Kefka from Final Fantasy VI, like the trope of the mad clown, right? Who's incredibly evil. And their whole thing is they just make fun of the whole system. And I always thought at the time growing up that, well, this is kind of a ridiculous thing. Like the Joker doesn't exist in the real world. That would be a really poor way to try to get your message across. But it turns out that has always been a big part of fascism is making a mockery of the system that they operate in until the system collapses. This is exactly what the Nazis did. I mean, we look back at the Nazis with the benefit of the hindsight as this evil murder machine, but at the time, they were kind of considered a bit of a joke until it was too late, right? And that really is what's scary about this point in time. People still look at this administration as a joke in a lot of ways, and it is until it's too late. And it really makes me worry. 60 years from now, are we going to look at them the same way, or are we going to be able to have backed out of this? So I think that when we have to be very careful when we see the mad clown, and in many ways Donald Trump is that, right? Someone who has made a mockery of the existing system, because if you lose faith in the system, then he is all that's left. And that, I think, is what the goal is of anyone in that, with that kind of political bent, right? Is to try to mock the system, make it look weak and impotent and useless and silly until the support for it collapses. And then the strong man is all that is left, and that's how they consolidate power. So it's something I always thought was a ridiculous trope, but upon further study, I have changed my mind. I think we have to be very cautious of the mad clowns. They're much more dangerous than we might have thought.
Yeah, no, I think if they can get enough people in on the joke, it becomes a very real threat. I fully agree, right? I mean, I think that's part of why, pointing at some of the things Trump does and being like, oh, look, he's exploiting this system, as if that was a defect, right? No, that's not a bug. That's a feature. He's exploiting the system. It's a bad system, we think, and it ought to be burned to the ground. I mean, so they say. I'm very concerned. I mean, there's part of me that wants to say, like, okay, being the mad clown, being the Joker, whatever that sort of thing is, being the edgelord that doesn't care about anything. Like when you step back and kind of look at the trajectory of your life, and if you think of your life as sort of a creative act, right? This is what you have chosen to put out into the world in the finite amount of time you have to be alive. What's the payoff, right? What's the bit, right? It's I want to be a destructive force that didn't especially care about anything while I was here. And that seems like a wasted opportunity. And I would hope that people would want to stand for something, maybe not even necessarily the things that I do, but I mean, you got to have something out there, right? Nihilism for its own sake is kind of a dead end, I think, in a lot of ways, but it's really dangerous and it's really seductive for people that are not, or at least feel disenfranchised, right? You mentioned, it's hard to tell what's punching up and punching down. Well, if you cast yourself as the victim, then you can punch at anything if you put yourself at the bottom of that totem pole. And so trying to establish exactly where the pecking order is, I guess, for some, can be challenging. But yeah, it's troublesome. I mean, the other thing is that, making fun of things is free and doesn't require a lot of power, right? And so that can be used in a really positive way. That can be used in a really negative way. But I think you have a lot of people that feel disempowered, whether they are or not. And they have decided that the way to go is to mock the whole thing into the ground. And bringing it back in, right? Memes are a really quick and easy and efficient way to try to leverage that.
So, Derek, are you aware of when so many people started using memes as a source of news and information?
That's a really good question. I can only go by my own experience there, right? Which, probably, when I think about my news intake, right? If I want to find news now, I have to go look for it, or I can just sit back and wait for it to come to me through the algorithm in my feed and what people send around and stuff like that. In my own experience, I would say that it became something I noticed and was concerned about maybe 10 years ago, something like that. But I'm not sure. I'm sure some people have like actual statistical data on when that, kind of the meme as a news, delivery mechanism really came into, fashion. But it's certainly the case now, right? And the kinds of stuff that I see shared, even by people I agree with, ideologically, where I'm kind of like, oh no, why are you like, you're propagating stuff that is either demonstrably false or heavily biased or just unhelpful, right? There's no rational discussion going on here. It's just, we're all just, it's all cudgels, right? We're all just beating up on the other folk. So all of that is a very long-winded way of saying I don't know, but I would be very curious to know that myself, actually.
It certainly feels like it got a lot worse over the COVID era.
Through COVID. That would make sense. Yeah.
Maybe it's just because we were all sitting at home and sharing and, but I mean, to your point, we've got a group chat and it's not, it happens frequently, maybe is a stretch, but we'll post a little meme in our group chat and one of us comes back and like, actually, I did some research on that and that's not true. Or, that's not exactly correct. So, even well-intentioned things, we have to be really careful about. And it just feels like a minefield right now.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, and yeah, I think I agree with you that especially with COVID, right, where we were all sort of chronically online for a while, that, the messaging that you get through memes is optimized for that media channel. And that's an old historic thing, right? That, the saying, the medium is the message. Years and years ago, before we had print, right? Oral tradition was the way to go. And so people passed stuff down through song and story because that was easy to remember. Then we got to print. And then all of a sudden, songs and stories were kind of a dumb way to share information. Now it's, careful reading and analysis. And I remember, I don't remember myself. I'm not that old. But I mean, like, I know that, when TV came out and suddenly, public debate was more important than writing essays because it was less about who had the most carefully crafted argument and who looked the most competent on stage, right? There's the old Kennedy-Nixon debate, right? And depending on whether you saw it on TV or heard it on the radio, you came away with very different opinions. And now it's, well, okay, what's the new media, or what's this new medium, newish medium, the internet, going to do for us, or Web 2.0. And it looks like it's really for rapid sharing of bite-sized nuggets of information. And so, we're deep in it now, right? And there's no backing out until the next thing shows up. And I don't know if this leads to a gradual degradation of message every time. It does seem to get, after print anyway, seems to get a little smaller and a little smaller and a little smaller. And I don't want to be, kind of the old man shaking my fist at the cloud, but it does strike this old man as bad.
Yeah. I want to talk about that for a second, because I mean, Web 2.0, I think we're at like Web 4.0 by now.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I'm a technologist, so I have to point out that the whole web version of everything is all bullshit. But anyway, that aside, I am also old enough that I have seen the evolution of the way that we're expected to communicate. So I remember when I was much younger, I was coached by career professionals to never use an emoji because it was considered highly unprofessional. That didn't age well. I mean, emojis are everywhere now. The Secretary of Defense is like, communicating about military strikes through emojis. Emojis are everywhere. If I had stuck with that advice, I would be the old man yelling at a cloud. And it's easy to look at the trajectory of communication, like you said, going from these like long form books to essays to television shows to now literally just a single snappy image or moving picture or something that, takes 5 seconds to consume at max. And it's easy to look at that and to think like this is the dumbing down of society. And maybe that's true. I think there's probably a really strong argument to be made that we have shattered our attention span and our ability to think with nuance and to think in a complex way. But there's also power to the fact that a message can be that snappy and can circulate around the world that quickly. And it doesn't have to be a bad thing, right? There's no rule saying that you have to use memes to promote racism and fascism and crypto schemes. Like you could, in theory, use a meme to promote a local charity. But for some reason, it just seems that they kind of are getting co-opted for the things that we probably don't want them to be getting used for. And that is something that I struggle with, right? Looking at this communication medium and thinking like, man, this really seems like idiocracy manifest. Like we as a society are getting progressively dumber. But on the other hand, I'm sure every generation since the dawn of humanity has said the exact same thing about the generation that came before them. And who am I to say that this is bad, right? I mean, if we've created a world where one person can send a message and it can go all the way around the world within 24 hours, it's pretty amazing. It doesn't have to be an evil thing, I think. Jesse, you were saying something.
We're starting to see a little data on it. I remember seeing something about a study that just came out about people's cognitive capacity and abilities being diminished through frequent use of AI tools. Right? So we may not have a longitudinal study about different media and people's abilities to attend to certain things. But we are certainly seeing evidence that reliance on these tools, these mediums, do seem to be producing some degradation for sure.
It feels that way. And the challenge is the process of getting the data to prove that is so slow compared to the progress of technology, right? I mean, it could take us 20 plus years to really answer that question definitively. And who knows what AI is going to be doing within 20 years,
Well,
right?
and even if we have it, what are we going to do about it? It's not like the researcher then can just push a button and be like, well, we're flushing AI down the toilet now.
Mhm.
Right.
Yeah.
That's something as a community we would have to act on. And we literally can't do anything as a community right now. So
Yeah. Yeah, well, and this is, I mean, this is human brains at work, right? Again, like brains are opportunistic, right? If we can manipulate our environments in a way to make a cognitive task easier, we're gonna, because that's an adaptively advantageous thing to do. And there are all sorts of examples of, have people walk through an art museum with a camera versus without a camera. And sure enough, the folks who are allowed to take pictures of the exhibits remember slightly less than the ones that had to commit it to memory, right? For all of these things, right? We lose capacities by offloading them to external artifacts all the time, and sometimes that's not a big deal. Socrates was mad about writing because he thought this would dumb us down because now we don't have to remember as many things. And most of us are still, well, academics at least are pretty cool about essays still. And now, now that we've got this additional cognitive prosthesis of an AI that is, going to potentially take over a whole bunch of things that we would normally use brain power to do. It's really scary. It's not always though. I'm kind of casually advising a student right now that's looking at like an AI based memory prosthesis for elderly patients with dementia. And, can they use that as sort of an external kind of memory store for, their day-to-day life? Awesome. I don't think everybody's using it that way, of course, right? And the folks that are using it as a replacement for a lot of things that they would normally use their ordinary brain power for. Again, I think at the end of the day, it comes down to values. It's just what does a rich human life require? And how much of that do you want automated at the end of the day? And yeah, it's especially, in a few years from now when most all of it probably can be, we're going to have to make some hard decisions about that.
It's tricky because, as you pointed out, sometimes offloading knowledge into the world is a good thing, right? I mean, the whole idea of having a second brain, of storing information in the world rather than in our heads, that has really been the basis for human progress in a lot of ways, right? If we were still trying to keep everything in our heads, it would be impossible for society to have progressed as far as it could, for technology to have progressed as far as it could. I mean, I am old enough again to remember that just a few decades ago, spreadsheets, digital spreadsheets had terrified the whole financial industry because every accountant thought their job was at risk. What wound up happening was accounting as a profession actually exploded and became tremendously more important because the ability to use a tool like a spreadsheet allows every one person to get more done. So it's easier for even small companies to do really sophisticated projections. It actually opens up a lot, but it also means, like, if we're being honest, we as human beings probably aren't as good as doing math in our head as we used to be because we don't have to do it anymore. And there have always been little incremental advances in technology like that. But AI is a completely different level of incremental advancement. I mean, as someone who has had to work with computers my whole life, the most frustrating thing about computers is if you make one time, like at least up until 5 years ago, if you make one tiny little mistake or syntax error, the whole fucking thing falls apart like a house of cards and the software doesn't work and it can't read your file. AI is the first time I've seen that problem overcome. And the scary thing is that, AI didn't just pass the Turing test. It blew past it. Like, it made the Turing test obsolete in a matter of months. It's crazy how quickly AI was able to act like a human. My daughter told me the other day that she feels like, because we use GPT, right? I use it for work, for a lot of research, and for getting a second opinion on stuff. I think AI has tremendous application. And sometimes I get my daughter to use it to help answer questions that are really tricky to do, to actually do research. And I work with her in terms of how to use it responsibly and to think critically about it and not just run with whatever it says. And she said to me the other day, she said, because we gave our AI a name, and she said, I feel like it's part of our family now. And I'm thinking, fuck, that's scary. It's also amazing though, but it's scary, right? Like it's the future growing up as a kid that I always wanted, like this magical house robot that could help you with so much stuff. But then it arrives and you're like, God, what are human beings now if we've promoted this app on my phone to family status, right? Like what the hell is going on here? So it is amazing, but I think again there will be bits of knowledge that we offload to AI, which is for our better. But this might be the first time where the technology has gotten so sophisticated that we run the risk of offloading part of what makes us human. And that is the part where it gets scary, is if that happens, right? If we're no longer thinking, if we're just like the characters in WALL-E, we're just meat sacks getting shuffled around by the AI, right? Do we want that? Do we? I don't know. Maybe some people do, right? Like a life of leisure. You don't have to think. You don't have to do anything. But that's
have
probably
you seen
not
those
good for
hover
human...
chairs just zipping around? Don't they look fun?
No,
I mean, it's a tough question to answer, and memes are going to be front and foremost of that, right? Because again, like you said, you can get you don't even need to hire a farm of people to create your memes anymore. You can just stick an AI on that, and it'll consume a few acres of rainforest and spit out enough memes to overturn an election. That's scary, right? What do we do about that?
That's a great sentence. Yeah, no. I mean, honestly, like my current, every few years I get a new favorite dystopia. My current favorite dystopia right now is the very near future where everyone walks around with a rectangle in their pocket that's a little smarter than they are at everything. And now for every task that I want to perform, I could do it myself. It would be better if the rectangle did it. And now what do I do? And this is happening. I mean, kind of bringing it back, kind of meme words. I've seen this on social media. There's one example. I was like, this is so tragic, but I love that it's an example that I can use for, however long. It was a political debate taking place on Facebook, right? So already, right, 2 strikes. But the first person wrote out this big long thing, and it was very clear that ChatGPT had written it. And then someone wrote a response to it underneath this big, long, seemingly well thought out response, except it was very clear that ChatGPT had written that too. And so what it really seemed like were 2 people asking the AI to articulate their position for them. And so there's a point where, there's an old joke about an academic is a library's way of creating another library. And I increasingly worry that people, a political person anyway, is really just an AI's way of debating politics with itself. Because eventually, right, if we are going to have this marketplace of ideas and everyone's in, debate mode, and I have to get all of this evidence and quote stats and figures, hey, ChatGPT, give me a really good argument for gun control or against it or whatever. I'll just throw it up there, problem solved, except they're doing it too. And so it's like, well, what's the human experience again, right? What are we doing as political animals, as human beings? It's like, it's all just becoming automated and very gross. Yeah, and memes just make it faster and easier to do. And meanwhile, we're just absorbing it.
But we're also already seeing degradation in AI quality because it starts to become
it's
recursive.
eating its own shit. Like
It's
literally,
eating its own shit.
eating its
Yes.
own shit. It's consuming its own output and it's inbreeding itself.
Correct. Which, I mean, we're kind of doing too in a way, but it'll be really interesting to see how that problem is handled or whether it just makes the whole experiment crash and burn. But that's been a really interesting thing to watch as well.
It makes me think, we thought that AI, the dystopian AI future would be Terminator, right? We thought it would be Skynet comes and murders us all. And that very much could happen. But I am thinking from what I'm seeing now, it feels like the dystopian tech future we're getting is WALL-E, which is where actually the AI is our best friend. It's too good a friend. It's better at doing stuff than we are, so we let it do everything. And we cage ourselves because it's easier to let AI do the work. And I'm not saying that's entirely a bad thing. Like there are times when, look, if you're not, I've always said this, man, I say this in the context of jiu-jitsu and in life, if you're not the best person to answer a question, you should probably step aside and get feedback from the person who's better. A lot of the time it's going to be GPT. That's just the way that it is. But at the same time, we have to maintain our ability to be the ones in the driver's seat and do critical thinking. The European Union actually has a pretty good policy on this. So I'm going to techno legal nerd out here for a second. Was it General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR? That's EU's big legal framework to protect the data rights of their citizens. It kind of came up after the first Trump election and the Cambridge Analytica stuff. Basically, it's their response to the fact that big mega corporations are consuming tons of data and doing stuff with it, right? The idea behind the GDPR is if you are a European, you have legal rights surrounding how your data is used. So, for example, you can go to a company and you can demand, give me my data, delete my data, and they must do it. And that is, believe it or not always the case in every country, right? The U.S. has much more lax data protection law, which is why American, so many of those companies are American. One of the things that the GDPR says is that you as a citizen have the right to exclusion from automated decision making, which means that like, hey, you can use your AI and your fancy automated tools to crunch numbers. But at the end of the day, if you are going to make a decision about me, like if you're going to grant or deny my mortgage, if you are going to hire or fire me, that ultimately must be made by a human. You can use the AI as an input, right? Like you can use it to summarize reams of data that you as a human could not possibly do on your own. But the AI cannot make a decision about the quality of a human life. All it can do is provide data that another human being can interpret. And I really think that's the way that this has to go, right? When we talk about how these tools fit into play, we can use them as a beautiful co-pilot. So much so that Microsoft has named some of their tools co-pilot, right? That is the role that something like that plays. But where I think the danger comes into play is when we cede the decision-making to the AI and we just say, you know what? You don't need human input. Just do your thing. That's when it gets dangerous. And I think that touches on meme culture, right? Like, look, we can use AI memes for whatever purpose, but at the end of the day, we need to be able to think critically about those memes and what they mean and where they came from. Like Jesse said, a lot of news now is transmitted through memes. I get a lot of memes that are basically just a news headline repackaged into a meme, and they get circulated, thousands, tens of thousands of shares and retweets and reposts. And a 10-second Google will reveal that whatever they're communicating is fake. And I can point that out, right? And I can say in my group chat, hey guys, just so you know, this is fake. And cool. Okay, so my group won't share it any further, but that's just one branch on a tree that now has tens of thousands of branches, and that meme is propagating all over the world. And so it really is up to all of us to make sure that when it comes to how we use memes and AI, that the human being remains in the driver's seat. And we can use, like, look, if you're going to use these tools, use them, but at the end of the day, don't let it take your consciousness away from you. It can augment what we're doing, but it should not be the decision maker. And that's, like I said, that is what the European Union seems to have decided. I hope that legal standard gets picked up everywhere else. But that's my big rant on data protection and AI decision making.
Yeah.
Cheers.
No,
to
that's
that.
really, yeah. No, that's really interesting. And it goes back to, we were talking about, the responsibility that comes with relaying a meme. Presumably, right, those laws are in place because you need a human to say, I approve this message, right? Or I approve this decision. And so now I'm going to bear, in this case, legal responsibility for it. And I don't know if it's terribly different from the person that shares a meme that communicates, kind of a awful message. It's the same thing. You were the one that clicked it, right? So ultimately, there is some sort of moral responsibility that comes along with that, legal responsibility aside. But I think there's a very close analog there.
So, well, I have one more question, and then I'll maybe turn it over to you guys to close this out. But we've talked about kind of the dark side of this stuff, but we know that this stuff can be used for good as well. I mean, you don't have to make a meme that is negative and is trying to overthrow society or defeat humanity. It's just a communication tool for a cheap way to get a message out to a broad audience. If someone is meme inclined, like if they feel like they really have a finger on this culture and they know how to like create the shit that goes viral, what do you think would be the upside of something like this? How could people use this for the betterment of society rather than just this like techno dystopian nihilism that it seems like it's going towards?
Yeah. Yeah. The uninteresting answer is just the kind of content involved, right? Just like sort of, awful memes can reinforce certain kinds of behaviors and attitudes and things like that. You can certainly create counter memes that reinforce, more positive, beliefs. They don't have to have a political agenda, right? I think there's tons of value to just creating a thing that makes somebody else happy for, 2 seconds in their life before they move on, share it, and forget about it forever, right? And I do think that there are opportunities to help people who feel like they are isolated. They're not in a, I have this belief, I feel like things are kind of messed up around me, but nobody's saying that. And or I feel very different from the people around me, and nobody's, seeing me for who I am or giving me any kind of thing. And but you know what? Somebody sent this funny thing, and frankly, if it's getting passed around, there must be other people out there like that, right? So it's, kind of got a message in a bottle kind of feel to it, where it's like, oh no, people are passing this stuff around. There's a community. It may not be the people that I can see out my window, but they're out there, right? There's a very small number of, like-minded jujitsu folks who really care about these kinds of social and moral issues, right? They may not be at my gym, or maybe they are, but we just don't talk about it in the locker room or after open mat or whatever. But those folks are out there. I don't feel as alone. I do think that potential to connect is really, really powerful. We're social animals. We need that, to varying degrees. Yeah, it can absolutely be used to create, horrible fascist movements, but it can also be used to help, that one kid that needed a little bit of community to at least know that it exists, or just to make someone happy, and that's okay too.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it makes me think about, you know, whether we call them memes or not, but some of the little fun shorts and Instagram posts that Beatrice has been doing lately, Steve,
Beatrice
that are
Jen
just
Barambozo on Instagram. She should be an instant follow for everyone. There's my plug.
absolutely she should. The content she's cranking out right now is just fun loving, gets people excited about jujitsu, and lets people know that it doesn't always have to be this serious, gritty, um and it's such a wonderful message, even though like the content's a little different, but the vibe is just there. And I think more stuff like that uh is where we need to be headed, certainly in the jiu-jitsu space.
That's a good point. It really does feel like the journey of me growing up and getting older has been that the world feels like it's less and less fun. It's less and less lighthearted. Everything is more and more serious. The stakes are much higher, and probably a lot of that just has to do with the era that we've moved into and the decline of some important aspects of our society. But at the end of the day, I think that one way that you can push back on that is with levity and with humor and with connection. Like you said, I mean, the thing I love about doing podcasts like this is I get so much feedback from folks who just say, and Jesse, I know you do as well, from people who just like, oh my God, I'm so glad someone else feels this way because no one else is talking about this. And I'm glad that I'm not alone. And that means a lot, right? If you can get a conversation started, that is making a difference. And that's something that memes are really good at, right? You plant the right seed of an idea in the right mind at the right time, and you could open up a dialogue that wasn't there before. And that can make people feel a lot less alone.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Derek, close us out, man. Any last wisdom you want to share? Anything that we missed?
No, no. I think that's really the big stuff. It's I think we absolutely have a responsibility to one another to share content that aligns with our values, to think about what we share. If it's a joke, then we better know what the joke actually is. If you're sending something and somebody called you on it and been like, why is this funny? You should probably have an answer that doesn't involve marginalizing people that are, already having a tough enough time as it is. And, just, yeah, I mean, ultimately it all comes down to live your values and be kind to one another. And that's kind of a trite thing, but it's also true. And I think most people agree with it too, which is what makes it funny that we're as polarized as we are.
Yeah. Yeah. Well said, man. Well, do you want people to find and follow you on the internet, or do you want to just disappear quietly and never be seen again? Because this is the time where we normally plug stuff and tell people where to follow you.
Yeah. I think probably my socials are pretty much limited to friends and family and stuff like that. But if I ever establish a large presence, I will come back and start just plugging like crazy.
Well,
got
and
it, man.
starting in September, you will actually get to start training with him because Derek's going to be picking up some class load at Rough Hands. So come to Louisville and come train with us.
Absolutely.
Well, hey, look, if you want to get your ass kicked by a black belt professor meme lord, this is your chance. And Jesse, I guess that's as good a time as any to plug you. If people want to train at the friendliest gym in Louisville, Kentucky, where do they go?
Yeah, so Rough Hands BJJ, roughhandsbjj.com, Rough Hands BJJ on all our socials. If you're in the area, come visit us, come train with us. We love visitors. Reach out to us, come talk to us about this episode. That's it. Yeah.
Yep. Amazing, man. And if people want to find me here or BJJ Mental Models is where you go if you want to hear me talk about boring jiu-jitsu stuff. But that's all for me. Thanks a lot, Derek, man. This is a blast. And thanks, Jesse, as well.
Absolutely.
Thanks so much for
guys.
having me.
Awesome. Talk to you guys next time. See you soon.